Oh, the shops will be closing soon, so you may want to rush. Hayya ala khair al-amal, you know. Yes. So rush. And the sisters, you can join us now if you like, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Welcome to the second seminar held by Shaykh. It's entitled Islamic Views on Scientific Concepts. We request that most of the questions at the end of it be written, but if Shaykh is alright with taking it from the floor as well, then we'll do that as well. So without further ado, Shaykh is going to give a small introduction and then we'll open it up for questions. From Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. The concept of Islam and science is an intriguing concept that has captivated Muslims for centuries. In contemporary times, however, more and more ideologies are being introduced such that they suggest that Islam or a religion and science cannot mix. They're separate. These ideologies came mostly in the early 1800s or the later 1700s as a consequence of the church's grip on science and its limit to science. For example, in the early 1600s, Galileo presented a publication which suggested that the earth is not at the center of the universe and everything is not going around it, which was the belief held by the church. On the contrary, he said, according to my investigations and my studies, the earth rotates around the sun and it is not at the center of the universe. After his publication, the church ordered him to withdraw the publication. He refused. So then he was summoned to and be imprisoned in the house under house arrest, and he stayed there until he died. Similar incidents started happening. Few decades later, scientists realized what Galileo said was true. The earth is not at the center of the universe, and they have evidence, but the church is saying otherwise. When similar incidents started happening where some scientists started to make some discoveries and the church started to suppress these actions, like Newton says, to every action there is a reaction, equal in the opposite direction. Similarly, Islam may not only be applied to physics, could be applied even socially. When there is so much pressure being put on science and scientists and facts, then there was another pressure coming from the other way around. And so some scientists, especially by the late 1700s, early 1800s, which is the time of the Industrial Revolution, they started rebelling against the church And hence they started finding alternative theories by which they can explain everything. So they started saying that science gives us all the answers. We don't need religion anymore. But they were caught in one thing. They had one problem, and that is creation. How did the human being come into existence? So they had no answer to that question. So they were really stuck. Until Darwin came with his theory, obviously, in the mid-1800s, when he published his book, The Origin of Species, suggesting that it could be a process of evolution and natural selection. And he presented some evidence. When that came in, scientists hailed it, perfect, as the Holy Grail. This now makes us independent of the theory of creation. We don't need Allah anymore, wal-'iyadhu billah. Don't need God. Khalas, everything happened like this. And so these theories started to be treated as laws. And there are evidence presented. For example, they present to you now that the microscope was discovered, the electron microscope was discovered, so people can study viruses, for example. They look at viruses, and they look at the epitopes on viruses. The epitopes of viruses evolve, change. So for example, you find a medicine, a medication, which captures certain epitopes on the virus. This virus can change these epitopes and become resistant to this medication. They say, there you go. So this is an example of evolution, and therefore this is a molecular scale evolution, and therefore we do have this happening in the grand scheme of things. So there is evidence to these theories. They don't come from vanity. And then you had the church suggesting that the life of the earth is only 25,000 years. How one priest sat down, looked at the Bible, and he looked at the prophets' ages mentioned in the Bible. Prophet Nuh lived so many years, for example. Prophet Adam lived so many years. Prophet Ibrahim lived. So he started calculating back, and he found that the life of the earth is about 25,000 years. Started basically when Adam, for example, came to this world. Scientists did some carbon dating experiments for which they showed the earth is not 25,000 years. The earth is millions of years old. So again, there was a clash between the church and the scientists. So what do you do here? And so on and so forth. Science came to say that the world, the universe, started from an explosion that they refer to as a Big Bang. And the explosion is continuing until this day. The movement is continuing until this day. There appears to be a point of origin, and everything is just moving, shifting outwards. These theories are being presented to people, and people are wondering, how do they take these theories? And they're not just when it comes to, for example, science. Even if we take a look at psychology, one major name people teach in psychology is Freud, and his theory, which he suggests that everything that the human, what drives every human for action, is his desire. The baby, when for example he or she suckles milk, it's doing it because of desires, and everything that drives the human being for any action, it is his desires. So basically, he eliminates the role of the aql, the mind. There's the role, the aql doesn't play any role. It's your desires that drives every single action. And again, this theory is being taught almost as a law. When it comes to philosophy, one common philosophy that is being taught in universities, those of you who study philosophy, is the philosophy of the idealists. The idealists suggest that this whole world is imagination. Nothing really exists. And they bring evidence by saying, for example, holograms. Look at holograms. They just fool the eye. Holograms are not real. This whole world is not real. And they bring evidence to this. Everything around us is not real. In fact, it is said a philosopher was once caught stealing, and he deliberately did that. When he was brought before the judge, he used some arguments, philosophical arguments, to prove to the judge that this whole world is an imagination, and therefore his action was just an imagination. It never happened. And the judge was really confused. He had no argument to argue against him because his argument sounded really logical, quote unquote. So he let him go. He let him go. They said that's what prompted Aristotle to write logic. Aristotle, when he came to write logic, those of you who study philosophy, he came to clarify the function of the mind, the aql, how to deduce an argument, whether it's valid or invalid, sound or not sound, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to all these theories out there are so many of them exist, and they're presented as laws, when in fact they're theories, suggestions. They're not laws. We have certain laws, yes. For example, the law of the conservation of energy. Energy is conserved in the world, in the universe. You cannot create it, you cannot destroy it. Transfers. Energy is conserved. And they have done experiments using calorimeters. Certain experiments where it is in a sealed vessel, and they do a reaction in a sealed vessel, and they calculate the energy going into the reaction and the energy coming out of the reaction. It's called a calorimeter. So they do that, and they figured it out. So these experiments exist. We have certain laws. Energy is conserved, mass is conserved, and so on and so forth. Laws of thermodynamics, certain laws of thermodynamics. So these are laws. However, the earlier things I mentioned are theories. What is Islam's point on all this? Where do we as Muslims stand? Because a lot of, not just youth, even adults, when they start reading all these theories, they get confused. They start doubting what's going on here. How do we respond to all this? Before I move further, I just want to clarify to everybody that I have a doctorate in chemistry, so I'm a scientist. So I guess I could be qualified to speak on science. And I'm a man of religion, so I guess science and religion do go hand in hand. So, what is the point of Islam on all this? First of all, when it comes to evolution, Islam says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. So the theory that we originated from monkeys is not really a valid theory. So then the next question comes, how do we explain the fossils that are being discovered of Homo sapiens? Fossils that are, for example, 200,000 years old, more or less. How do we explain this? Doesn't that prove evolution? Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says that no. He says that there were other Adams before our Adam who walked on this earth. Our Adam is not the first person who walked on this earth. He's the first of our generation of humans to walk on this earth. But apparently there were other creations of Allah who walked on this earth, who looked like us, but apparently they were bigger in sizes, And that's what the fossils are determining. So with that in mind, then we understand this theory and how it works. So we say Allah created us. There were human beings before us, or people who looked like human beings, and they were perished. And in our cycle, our generation of humanity, it starts from Adam and Eve. And interestingly enough, in the body, in the cell, there is something called DNA. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard about DNA. Now there's DNA in the nucleus of the cell, and there's DNA in the mitochondria of the cell. These terms may sound completely foreign to some of you. Mitochondria is an organ of the cell, basically has different parts, let's say. Like for example, this Husayniya, this place, this building, has a masjid. The masjid serves one purpose. It has this hall which serves one purpose. The ladies' hall serves another purpose. So you have different compartments, different places. Each one performs a function. In the cell, you also have different areas, different compartments, let's say. There is one area which is called the mitochondria. The function of this organelle, the mitochondria, is to produce energy. That's what gives you energy. When you eat food, the mitochondria, at the end of the whole process, produces what's known as ATP, which is your energy. Gives you your energy. In the mitochondria there is DNA. But the DNA in mitochondria is what scientists call this conserved DNA. Doesn't undergo this mitosis or meiosis process that DNA in the nucleus undergoes. And hence what some scientists have done is they looked at the DNA of the mitochondria and they traced it back generations to find that there is a scientific Adam and a scientific Eve. Indeed, humanity is propagated from one man and one woman. That scientifically they call them Adam and Eve. But they say this doesn't mean that there was one creation. There were other, but by natural selection, those offspring survived. The rest of the people may have, just for whatever reason, gone extinct. Okay. So anyway, scientifically speaking, we have an Adam and an Eve. And then they say this whole universe came into existence by coincidence. Yes, there was a Big Bang, and then by coincidence the Earth became Earth, the Moon became Moon, the Sun became Sun, Venus and Mars became Venus and Mars, and so on and so forth. Everything by coincidence. Some scientists did not buy it. Just doesn't make sense that everything happens by coincidence. They couldn't buy that. So one scientist who was a professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University, Lehigh, Lehigh University, is a professor there in biochemistry. He didn't buy this argument. Michael Behe, B-E-H-E. He said, I don't buy this argument that everything happened by coincidence. He studies bacteria. Bacteria is just one cell organism, one cell. We have billions of cells in our bodies. Bacteria is just one cell. He studied the bacterium, and he said that the organelles within this one cell are all independent on one another. So one organelle by itself would not have any purpose or function. You need the whole package together in order for it to be operational and functional. So he says that I don't buy evolution, because this machinery all must have presented or came into existence as a whole. Otherwise it would not have come. That's one. Two, Another scientist by the name of Jonathan Wells, W-E-L-L-S, was also a PhD. He's at Washington State. He developed, or he basically wrote a book called The Icons of Evolution, Science or Myth. In it, he argues that if evolution were true, this suggests that at some period in history we have one species in existence. Only one. Let's call it species A. Then after some years, A evolved. And now you have two species in existence, A and B. Then after some million years or whatever, thousands of years, another evolution took place. Now you have three species present, A, B, and C, and so on and so forth. He says, if that is the case, if we go back chronologically, time-wise, it means A would have been in existence, let's say, in the beginning, then B, then C, and so on and so forth. He says, however, scientific data doesn't show this. We find that all species kind of coexisted at the same time. So that kind of nullifies this argument where we have chronological order. There's no chronological order here. They coexisted. 1. 2. He cites a mathematician by the name of William Dembski. This guy lectures every now and then at Brown University. William Dembski used the theory of probability. Theory of probability and the chaos theory. Two theories. Chaos theory suggests that nothing is perfect in this world. There's chaos. Kind of falls under the chemist saying entropy. What drives a reaction is basically either enthalpy or entropy. Any reaction that comes into existence because of one of those two factors. It's either driven by heat or by disorder. Heat, not necessarily heat, but I mean the change of the heat, which is the delta G. The delta G is what drives the reactions, the Gibbs energy. So, Dembski says if you have 10 pebbles in your hand, and you label them 1 to 10, and then you throw them on the ground. Then you mark, okay, pebble 1 fell here, 2 there, 3, you mark their positions. Then you collect them again. You collect them again, you shake them again, and you throw them back on the ground. What is the probability that every stone will fall exactly where it fell before? 1 falls back on 1, exact same position, where you've labeled them. 2 falls on 2, 3 falls on 3, and so on and so forth. It says the probability of this happening is merely infinite. In other words, impossible. So he suggests then, mathematically speaking, to have an evolution that is a coincidence. Okay, the coincidence may be once, twice, okay, 10 times, okay, but hundreds of millions of times, coincidence, this doesn't make sense. Probability-wise, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And therefore, Michael Behe, Jonathan Wells also cites Michael Behe. He also cites Michael Behe in his... Michael Behe also has a book as well on evolution. Michael Behe then came up with another theory. He called it the intelligent design theory. This world has an intelligent designer. Not necessarily the God, some designer. Like you know, in the words of Jonathan Wells, he said, it is not necessarily the God of the Genesis. You know, the first book in the Bible is called the Book of Genesis. So he said, it's not necessarily the God of Genesis. However, there is an intelligent designer. Some designer who designed this whole universe, put it into existence. So these theories, or this intelligent design theory, is proposed by scientists. Some of them are professors who object to this concept of simple coincidence and evolution. Myself, being a chemist, there are certain reactions which I used to perform in which I had to be so meticulous. First of all, about the ingredients. what ingredients to add, to the proportions of the ingredients. What they call in chemistry stoichiometry, the ratio of one element versus the other, or one compound versus the other. I had to take care of this. Third, I had to make sure that there is no oxygen in the vessel, so I had to degas it, the reaction. Certain temperature. All these factors I have to put in place until I synthesize the crystals that I really want. Any factor changes, the ratio, temperature, oxygen, it will ruin my experiment. And that's when you start pulling your hairs off, because you wait 2-3 days for the reaction to occur, and then it fails. So PhD teaches you a lot of patience. So with all this, it would not have happened by coincidence. Now yes, some of these crystals do occur naturally, but they occur under certain environments and conditions which are similar to what I'm simulating in the laboratory. It does not happen by coincidence. It has to be certain factors that must be present to make this reaction succeed the way it is. So, if a simple reaction, I have to put in so much effort to design it and to make it successful, then this whole universe just came into existence by coincidence. It would have been great if chemistry worked that way. I would have finished my PhD in maybe 2 months. You just put the reactions together, you tell them, "Ma'a salama, I'll see you back. You guys finish everything, and I'll see you inshallah by coincidence, hopefully. You'll come back." So, these factors don't work that way. And that's why, Yarhamkumullah. That's why these people came up with the intelligent design theory. That's when it comes to this. How about, for example, idealists? What do we say about idealists? The philosophers who say this whole world is imaginary. One day one of those guys was teaching his students next to the river. He was standing next to the river, telling his students that, everything is imaginary in this world. Nothing really exists. We're just imagining. The whole thing is imagination. So one of the students was really smart. He gets up and he pushes this teacher into the water. So the teacher comes out, of the water, he's soaking. It's like, "What have you done?" He said, "What have I done?" He said, "Why did you drop me in the river?" He said, "It's all imaginary." If it's all imaginary, why did you get wet then? So simple argument, simple response. So what they've done is they said that the mind cannot be used as a tool to discover. Why? Because the mind makes mistakes. And they say one of the proofs is holograms. The mind makes a mistake, thinks there's something there, but it's not really there. We say that the response to this argument is invalid. Just because the mind makes a mistake, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I stop its function. I could close my eyes, for example, and touch this. I say, okay, I don't know what this is. This could be Pepsi, for example. I look at it, no, it's water. MashaAllah. I ask for a bottle of water, I get a, MashaAllah, enough to feed everybody, MashaAllah. You want some? Share. So, my sense of touch made a mistake here. I thought I am touching some Pepsi, let's say, but not water. This mistake does not mean I don't have a sense of touch. The sense is there, it's functional, it's operational. My conclusion was wrong, but does it mean that the sense does not exist? The mind can make mistakes sometimes, yes. But does it mean it doesn't exist and we turn it off? So that's how we answer the idealists. Freud. We come to Freud and tell him that you say everything is driven by desire. Then, well, how do you explain people like the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam who sacrificed their life? What desire is there? Never mind the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. There was a companion of Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam by the name of Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr. Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr was imprisoned by Harun. al-Rashid. He was a great companion. He was beaten with a stick in which they put nails. So imagine, they used to beat him with it. What for? They wanted a confession. Confession about what? About the names of the Shia. What are the names of the Shia of Imam al-Kadhim? Give us the names. Why? So they can go arrest them. They used to beat him with it. Sometimes on a daily basis he would receive 100 beatings with this. And he would not respond. One day he softened a little bit. You know, it's not easy. Some of us may not even bear one beating with this. He used to bear 100 of them. One day he suffered. He softened a little bit. He softened a little bit. He was about to speak. In the cell that's adjacent to his cell, he heard a voice. There was another companion, a great companion by the name of a man, Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman. Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says this man is like the Salman of this time. The Salman of this day is this man, Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, a great alim. May Allah bless his soul. Great companion. Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman was in the adjacent cell to Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr. Either through divine inspiration or maybe he realized Ibn Abi Umayr was weakening. Either way, he spoke. He spoke from the adjacent cell. He said, Ya ibn Abi Umayr, تذكر وقوفك بين يدي الله سبحانه وتعالى. Remember the day when you will be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So remember that day. Don't speak. So when Ibn Abi Umayr heard this, he gained momentum and strength. He went back. He said, I will not say anything. So they continued beating him. And this continued for, some say 4 years, some historians say 17 years. To the extent when he came out of the prison, because the prison was darkness, complete darkness, he never saw light. He came out blind, could not see anymore. He stayed in darkness for too long, such that his vision became malfunctioned. Now we tell Freud, what made Ibn Abi Umayr bear these whips and these lashes and these punishments? What made him bear? What desire stood in his path? On the contrary, had he spoken, Harun would have given him this whole dunya. He would have rewarded him, he would have had a comfortable life. So if it were truly desire, he should have acted the other way. What made him act? It must be something other than desire, and that is what the philosophers say. It is al-aql, the mind. His aql told him that, you know what, you're getting beaten, you're getting hurt, but be patient, because on the day of judgment Allah will reward you for it. That's what the aql, the function of the aql, the mind. Remember, 3 things drive us to do whatever we do in this world. Every human being is driven by one of the 3 factors, 3 powers. Either desire, or anger, or mind, the aql. Every action you do stems from one of those 3. There is a 4th force, which is a hindering force, not a motivational force, known as imagination, the imagination. Some people, for example, you put a man in one room and next to him there is a dead body in the next room. He may not be able to sleep the whole night. He wants to get out of his room to drink a cup of water, he wouldn't. He's scared. What's scaring him? What if this guy wakes up? What if he comes and a mummy, he's a mummy. This is imagination, not real. He's dead. But there's that imagination force. And that force is an hindering force. It's not a motivational force. It stops the action. But what drives people into action is one of those 3. Desire, anger, or aql, mind. When people fight in battles, why do they fight? Because of their Anger. Anger. They get angry and the adrenaline kicks in. People fight. That's why you have these drums, for example, beating to motivate those soldiers and to spring them into actions. That's anger. Or desire. You know, people eat because they get hungry. That's a desire. People drink because they get thirsty. That's a desire. They do other things because there's a desire for it. That's why the Islam didn't come really much to teach people, to remind them to eat or to drink, because they will do so. You know, desire will drive them to do this automatically. But rather came to emphasize the role of the aql, the mind, the aql. The aql, it said, don't forget this aql. Eat and drink, but with moderation. That's what aql tells you. The mind tells you. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why you need to control your anger and control your desire. The aql is what drives you to do that. The mind. Nonetheless, so that's when it comes to Freud and his theory of psychology. So when it comes to all these theories, there are arguments and responses to all of them. What do we do here? So is it like, should we not study them? What do we do here? Islam says no. You're allowed to study theories. However, you must strengthen your own aqeedah before you get into such mess. I had a colleague when I was doing my postdoctorate. He used to work on a disease called hepatitis B. Hepatitis B. He used to work on blood samples containing this illness, this disease. He said that before he started working on the disease, they want to investigate, figure out how it happens, how can they cure it. He says, before I started working on it, I had to get an immunization shot from the disease. I had to get immunized. And interestingly, with hepatitis B, you get one shot, and then you have to wait 6 months, right? For the next shot. You have to wait 6 months. So 6 months you wait, you can't do the research until they give you a second booster shot, then you're ready. Then you can start going into this lab and performing research on this disease. Without the proper immunization, you cannot go in. Islam says without the proper immunization, don't get into this mess. How you immunize yourself? By strengthening the aqeedah, tawheed. Usul al-Deen, one of them is tawheed. Strengthen your tawheed, your foundation, before you go in. And then go study, no problem. Study these theories. They're out there. And our philosophers, our ulama, our scholars have done a wonderful job answering a lot of these theories and misconceptions, which at first they may appear to be very solid. They may appear very logical, but once you dig deeper a little bit, you find there is nothing in there. It's hollow. And the whole thing collapses. When it comes to, for example, viruses and them changing epitopes, we say, well, there is no problem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them and gave them a mechanism to defend themselves. This mechanism is by changing their epitopes. That does not mean it's a theory of evolution, but rather it's a theory of creation. When you come to, for example, one of the evidence they have to evolution is that they say humans' DNA and rats' DNA has about a 60% homology. So really what makes a human is the 40%. Well, we say no problem. This is the greatness of Allah and His creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created whatever creation He has, and with simple variation or minor variations, He made a rat and a human. And that's what Allah says in the Quran. There are signs within themselves. Let them look at these signs. All this happened by coincidence? I had a friend of mine He used to study, he took a class, an elective in astronomy class. Says one day the teacher came in and started talking about the sun, the moon, and the galaxy and all this. He says to think that all this, the distance of the sun from the earth, if the sun comes a bit too close, we'll die from heat. If it moves a little bit too far, we'll die from cold. If the moon, one day decides, you know what, let me get closer to earth, I really like earth, let me get closer a bit to it. You will have the tides, raging. What makes tides, high tide, low tide, is this minor distance and variation between the earth and the moon. That's what makes high tide and low tide. Imagine if the moon comes a bit closer, or goes a little bit further. We'll have disaster, chaos. And Allah says, لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. Each one has its own orbit. So this professor, this teacher was talking about all this, this moon, the sun. He says to think that all this happened by coincidence is really hard. He himself, the teacher said, he paused for a second, he said to think all this happened by coincidence is really hard. How could all this have happened by coincidence? So when it comes to even scientists who really use their aql, their mind, they will realize that, they're in the state of denial, where we have to separate science and religion. We cannot accept God. So we have to accept this other alternative. And that's what the Quran says, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَرَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًّا. They rejected the science, but their hearts, their nafs, their selves, realized this is the truth. But they rejected out of arrogance and oppression. They don't want to accept the truth. So having said all this, we realize, and we haven't, by the way, we have to add a disclaimer, we have not done justice to the topic. I've only been speaking for about 35 minutes or so. Evolution is a course that's taught for like a whole semester at universities. Philosophies of Freud and idealists and other philosophies, they're like huge topics here. So we have not done justice here to the whole topic, but it's just like, a taste, appetizers basically. And like I said, there are some great books by our ulama that you guys can read. For example, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr in his book Our Philosophy. It's a great book to see about, for example, the different philosophies compared to Islamic philosophy. He also has another book called Our Economics. She talks about the economic financial system, Islamic financial system versus the other financial systems. Some of our fuqaha and their books on Tawheed, like Shaykh Saduq's book on Tawheed, is a good book to read. Monotheism. Sayyid Kamal Haidari's book on Tawheed is really good too. I'm not sure if it exists in English though, that one, that last one. But there are books anyways, by our ulama and fuqaha, which have addressed a lot of these issues and concerns. They exist. So let us not get, for example, carried away by some of these ideologies, thinking that these are laws, because yes, they are being taught as laws, but they are theories. Theories. They're not laws. And Islam has ways to address them. Now I will open the floor for questions. Can I see it? Next. Great. Yeah. Let's bring them all this way, so all fly away. I don't really understand this question. So scientific research and advancement is so important, yet how can we find in our community those who study science are centered with being community pharmacists and physicians. They see science as a job and religion as a mosque and prayer. How can we create a link between scientific advancement and religion advancement? I think I just spoke about scientific and religion advancement. So that's how we can make a link. I don't understand the question really, to be honest with you. How to encourage people to become scientists? Well, it's a passion, right? And not everyone likes PhDs and likes to, go through the stress of a PhD, right? You have to have a passion for it. So it's something interesting and people like it. I mean, if you really like science, I think it's intriguing, it's fascinating. The research is something that's dynamic, it's not stagnant. But it all depends. Some people are happy with their professions, and there's nothing wrong in being a pharmacist. We need pharmacists. There's nothing wrong being a physician. We need physicians. So, and there are those who just like maybe something that's a bit more challenging, like research. They like the stress of the job of research and failing experiments, and then go back and try to figure out how to solve the problem, and so on and so forth. So, it's just something, in my opinion, intriguing. One advice I have for those of you who are like in first year universities, or maybe in high schools. I mean, it's a bit different here because you guys go into your professions, your careers from high school or something. Over there, for example, you go into general science for 4 years until you graduate, and then if you want to apply for medical school, you apply later. So the advice I give to students back in North America is that in your first year of science, go do research in a lab as a volunteer. Do research and see if you like it. If you really like doing experiments and research and all these things, if something you enjoy, you may want to consider. You shouldn't be throwing paper, my friend. Come please and place it on the table. Yes, whomever it was. So try it. See if you like it. You like it, then pursue it. You don't like it, then figure out something else. Here it's a bit different though, because you guys apply from high school straight into universities, into like medical school, dental school, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure really how your system works, but if you can somehow, before you get into your decision, get into research, do it, try it out, try to do so. I think it's really interesting. What is the perspective on alchemy, or the Islamic perspective on alchemy, and where our Imams the only ones who possess knowledge of it? Alchemy basically is the Arabic name for alchemia. Alchemia. And then which evolved into chemistry. So alchemy is basically alchemia. A lot of these words sometimes were discovered by the Arabs. So they got translated. So it's not a science that's possessed only by our Imams alayhimus salam. Yes, our Imams know of alchemy. But for example, we know Jabir ibn Hayyan, or Jabir. He studied with Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam alchemy, so he taught him some alchemy. And he was the first person to discover aqua regia, which is a mixture of nitric acid and sulfuric acid. Something you don't want to mess with, because it will dissolve you as a human being, literally. When we used to deal with this thing, we had to wear special gloves in the fume hood and really be very careful with this thing. It's just nasty, stuff. But he discovered it. He put it together, which could dissolve stuff, dissolve gold. People didn't know how to dissolve gold. They could heat it up, but this was one way of dissolving some stuff. So it was a great discovery of its time. So it's alchemy. Alcohol was actually alcohol, which comes from alcohol. It was isolated by the Muslim alchemists, and hence the name alcohol. So alchemy is not something that's only in the knowledge of our Imams alayhimus salam. Of course they have the ultimate knowledge of chemia, but there are some evidences where the pharaohs in their times, they did have some chemistry going on. Apparently they did know something about chemistry. So they did some reactions, some preservation, some things. So apparently they did some things over there. Of course, like I said, the knowledge of our Imam is a grand knowledge, and they did teach some of their students, like Jabir ibn Hayyan, about this knowledge. In the Renaissance period, as it was God versus nature, what role did Islam play into this? During the period which they called the Dark Ages, these were actually the Golden Ages. Dark Ages in Europe, but the Golden Ages in the Arabic world, in the Islamic civilization. And so many discoveries were made. A lot of these discoveries were then migrated into Europe, and that's where some of the advancements started to happen. For example, the Canon of Medicine by Ibn Sina. It was a book that was used in France until about the 1700s. So for about 400 or 500 years, this book was the book for medicine. The book for medicine. So this knowledge was transferred over to there. And Islam is not the kind of thing which says God versus nature. Islam doesn't have that. Yes, some philosophies started to come into Islam from the Greeks. When the Muslims started to read Greeks, Aristotle and his likes, they started translating their works. So then some misconceptions started to get introduced into the Islamic civilization. And that's why our Imam started to clarify a lot of these misconceptions that were introduced by these philosophers. So it's not وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ God versus nature. It's everything is just coexistence. Everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala devised this whole universe, created it, gave it a plan, and it's working according to this plan. And Muslims agree on this in general. Does the evil eye exist, or does science overrule this? Science only deals with materialistic things. Science cannot deal with spiritual things. That's why, that famous scientist who said that, the more I know, the more I realize that I don't know. So science recognizes its limitations. It's limited. It doesn't have every answer. Although some scientists think that we need to have a scientific justification for every phenomenon. It doesn't work that way. We can't. Okay. So there are certain issues that arise not from scientific facts. The evil eye, Quran talks about it. Of course it exists. وَمِن شَرِّ حَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدٍ. So it does exist. There are ways to protect one from such. For example, reading the 4 quls, Kafirun, Al-Ikhlas, Al-Falaq, and Al-Nas. Reading the last ayah of Surah Al-Qalam. Reading Ayat Al-Kursi. Reading a dua of protection, Dua Al-Hifz. There's a dua called Dua Al-Hifz, it's found in Mafatih Al-Jinan. So there are certain du'as a person can read which inshallah protects him from this. So science does not have an answer to everything. There are a lot of limitations to science. This is one of its limitations. Science cannot describe the ruh. It's very complex, the spirit, the soul. How do you really deal with it? Scientifically it's too complex to deal with it. Because science cannot see it, cannot see a ruh. They one day took a man who was dying, they put him in a glass chamber with all sorts of techniques, technologies, infrared, X-ray, something, they tried to figure out if they can see or detect the soul. So when this man died, they said there is no change whatsoever, nothing was detected on the radar, basically. Nothing was detected. So science is limited when it comes to that. Try to figure out what is ruh, but couldn't. So science has its limitation, and this is one of the limitations of science. Okay, I think we're done. It was really a pleasure to be with you, brothers and sisters, and inshallah we'll have the last lecture tomorrow. So I thank you all for attending. Please remember to pray for me and for my family, especially for my parents. And I do beg for your forgiveness if I have said or done anything. And inshallah, maybe we'll meet again. God knows when, but inshallah, we might meet again. جزاكم الله خيرا. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you for attending the seminar, Shaykh. There will be food, it should be arriving shortly, and we are handing out buckets for anyone who'd like to donate. If I could just end with a Surah Fatiha for Kul Marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Ziyarat will be recited.
Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah, Assalamu alaikum ya Nabi Allah, Assalamu alaikum ya Hasan al-Mujtaba, Assalamu alaikum ya Aba Abdullah, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Mawla wa Ibn Mawla, Assalamu alaikum ya Gharib al-Ghurba, Assalamu alaikum ya Sultan al-Hasan, Ali ibn Musa al-Rida wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Sahib al-Zaman, Allahumma lama min fitnat al-Zaman. Assalamu alaikum ya Shaykh al-Quran, أجر الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله وتعالى مكتجك وظهورك وجعلنا من أنصار وأعوانك ورحمة الله وبركاته.